I baptize you, my son, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." Those words came out of Pastor William Hayes' mouth during my grandson's baptism ceremony, in front of 200 members of Mount Calvary Baptist Church. The problem was, baby Isaiah wasn't Pastor Hayes' son. He was supposed to be my son Marcus's baby. But the way Pastor Hayes looked down at that 6-month-old infant, the way he cradled him with such tenderness, the way he said, "my son," instead of the traditional baptismal words, it became clear that Pastor Hayes wasn't just baptizing my grandson. He was baptizing his own biological child. My name is Luther Freeman. I'm 62 years old, and I've been a deacon at Mount Calvary Baptist Church for 25 years. I've served this congregation faithfully, tithed regularly, trusted our spiritual leadership completely, and raised my children to respect the authority of God's anointed servants. Until the moment our pastor accidentally revealed that he'd been having an affair with my daughter-in-law, Monica, and that the baby I thought was my grandson actually belonged to the man who'd been preaching to us about morality and faithfulness every Sunday for the past 3 years. The silence in the sanctuary after Pastor Hayes' slip was deafening. 200 people had heard him call my grandson, my son, during the baptism ceremony. Some looked confused, thinking they'd misheard. Others exchanged knowing glances, as if they'd suspected something all along. A few mothers covered their mouths in shock. Several deacons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But I knew exactly what I'd heard, and I knew exactly what it meant. Monica was standing at the baptismal pool, wearing a white dress that made her look angelic and pure, like the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child. She'd gone completely pale when Pastor Hayes made his revelation, and she was staring at him with a mixture of horror and panic, probably wondering if anyone else had caught the significance of his words. My son Marcus was standing next to her, holding the baptismal towel, dressed in his best suit, smiling with the pride of a new father presenting his firstborn to the Lord. He was completely oblivious to what had just been revealed about his wife and his pastor and his baby. The way Pastor Hayes held Isaiah during the baptism wasn't like the way he held other babies during the ceremony. There was an intimacy there, a tenderness, a connection that went beyond pastoral duty. He looked at Isaiah the way a father looks at his son, not the way a minister looks at a parishioner's child. "Let us pray for this child and his family," Pastor Hayes said quickly, trying to recover from his mistake. But the damage was done. The entire congregation had heard him claim my grandson as his own son, and now they were all wondering what it meant. After the ceremony, as people filed out of the sanctuary making polite conversation about the beautiful baptism, I pulled Monica aside in the church foyer. "We need to talk. Deacon Freeman, what about?" "About what Pastor Hayes just said during the baptism." Monica's hands started shaking, and I could see beads of sweat forming on her forehead despite the church's air conditioning. "I don't know what you mean." "He called Isaiah his son, in front of 200 people. I want to know why." "It was just a mistake." Sometimes pastors get emotional during baptisms and say things differently than usual. "Monica, I've attended hundreds of baptisms in my 25 years at this church. I've never heard Pastor Hayes call any baby my son during the ceremony. Maybe he was just feeling particularly close to our family today." Particularly close to our family. Or particularly close to the woman he'd been having an affair with for God knows how long. "Monica, I need you to tell me the truth. Is Pastor Hayes Isaiah's biological father?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and suffocating. Monica looked around the church foyer to make sure no one could overhear our conversation. Church members were still milling around, shaking hands with Pastor Hayes, complimenting the beautiful ceremony, discussing lunch plans. "I can't discuss this here." "Then where can we discuss it?" "Nowhere. There's nothing to discuss." "There's everything to discuss." Either Pastor Hayes made an innocent mistake during the baptism, or he revealed that he's been having an affair with my son's wife and fathered a child that my son believes is his. Monica started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic about being discovered, tears of someone whose carefully constructed lies were beginning to unravel. "Please don't say anything to Marcus," she whispered. Please. And there it was. The confirmation I didn't want but couldn't ignore. Monica wasn't denying the affair or the paternity question. She was begging me to keep quiet about what I'd learned. How long has this been going on? I can't talk about this. How long, Monica? Since before Isaiah was born. Before Isaiah was born. Which meant the affair had been going on for at least 9 months, probably longer. Which meant Monica had been deceiving my son throughout her entire pregnancy, allowing him to believe he was going to be a father while she was actually carrying another man's child. And Marcus has no idea? Marcus can never know. It would destroy him. It would destroy him. Monica was more concerned about managing the consequences of her affair than she was about the fact that she'd been betraying my son and our church family for months, possibly years. Monica, you've been having an affair with our pastor while married to my son. You've been sitting in church every Sunday, listening to sermons about morality and faithfulness, while living a lie. It's complicated. It's adultery. And it's a betrayal of everything our church stands for. Pastor Hayes is a good man who's been struggling with his feelings. We never meant for this to happen. A good man who's been struggling with his feelings. Monica was defending the pastor who'd been exploiting his position of spiritual authority to conduct an affair with a married woman in his congregation. Does he know that Isaiah is his son? Yes. And he's been letting Marcus believe that Isaiah is his biological child? We thought it was better that way. Better for who? Better for Monica and Pastor Hayes, who could continue their affair without consequences. Or better for Marcus, who was unknowingly raising another man's child while being betrayed by his wife and his spiritual leader. Monica, this has to stop. The affair, the deception, all of it. You don't understand how complicated this situation is. I understand that you and Pastor Hayes have been violating your marriage vows, your church membership vows, and your responsibilities to this congregation. We love each other. We love each other. Monica was justifying adultery and spiritual abuse by claiming it was love rather than sin. If you love each other, then you should divorce your spouses and leave this church to be together honestly instead of continuing this deception. We can't do that. It would destroy too many people. You're already destroying people. You're destroying Marcus, you're destroying this congregation's trust, and you're destroying the integrity of pastoral leadership. No one has to know. 200 people just heard Pastor Hayes call Isaiah his son during the baptism ceremony. People are going to start asking questions. Monica's face went even paler. Do you think they understood what he meant? I think some of them did. And I think others will figure it out once they start thinking about it. What are you going to do? That was the question I'd been dreading. What was I going to do with the knowledge that our pastor had been having an affair with my daughter-in-law and had fathered a child that my son believed was his own? I don't know yet. But I can tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. Please, Deacon Freeman. Please don't destroy our family. I'm not destroying your family, Monica. You and Pastor Hayes destroyed it the moment you started your affair. That evening, I sat in my study trying to process what I'd learned and decide how to handle the most difficult situation of my life. The walls were lined with theological books I'd collected over 25 years of faithful service, commentaries and devotionals that had guided my understanding of Christian living and church leadership. But none of those books had prepared me for discovering that our pastor, the man I'd trusted to guide our spiritual community, had been having an affair with my daughter-in-law and had fathered a child that my son was unknowingly raising. This wasn't just a family crisis. It was a church crisis that would affect 800 members of our congregation who trusted Pastor Hayes to provide moral and spiritual leadership. These were people who brought their children to be baptized by him, who sought his counsel during difficult times, who looked to him as an example of godly living. As a deacon, I had responsibilities to the church that went beyond my responsibilities as a father and grandfather. I couldn't just handle this as a private family matter when it involved the pastoral leadership of our entire congregation. But I also couldn't destroy my son's marriage and his understanding of his family without being absolutely certain about what I'd discovered. I needed more information before taking any action. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the contacts, looking for someone I could trust to help me understand what I'd witnessed. My finger stopped on Deacon Robert Washington, my oldest friend in the church and the man who'd helped me navigate every major crisis in my 25 years of ministry. Let me take you back to 1998, when I first met Pastor William Hayes and had no idea I was shaking hands with a man who would eventually destroy my family while wearing the robes of spiritual authority. I was 35 years old then, serving as a junior deacon under the leadership of Pastor Charles Robinson, a godly man who'd shepherded Mount Calvary Baptist Church for 22 years. When Pastor Robinson retired, the congregation spent 8 months searching for new pastoral leadership. Pastor Hayes came to us highly recommended, with a seminary degree from Morehouse School of Religion and 5 years of successful ministry at a growing church in Birmingham, Alabama. He was 35 years old, married to Dorothy Hayes, and they had 2 young children. During the interview process, Pastor Hayes impressed the search committee with his theological knowledge, his preaching ability, and his vision for growing our congregation. He spoke passionately about the importance of pastoral authority, about the need for strong moral leadership in the African American community, and about his commitment to building families and strengthening marriages. A pastor must be above reproach, he told us during his candidacy interview. The congregation looks to their spiritual leader as an example of Christian living. If the pastor's life doesn't reflect the values he preaches, then his ministry has no integrity. Above reproach. Those words would haunt me 3 years later when I discovered that Pastor Hayes had been living a double life, preaching about family values while destroying families through his secret affairs. But in 1998, Pastor Hayes seemed like the answer to our prayers. He was young enough to bring energy and new ideas, experienced enough to provide stable leadership, and spiritual enough to guide our congregation through the challenges of urban ministry. The congregation voted unanimously to call Pastor Hayes as our new spiritual leader. His first sermon was about faithfulness, faithfulness to God, faithfulness to family, faithfulness to the church community. He preached with passion and conviction about the importance of keeping commitments, honoring vows, and living with integrity. Faithfulness is the foundation of every relationship, he declared from the pulpit. Without faithfulness, there can be no trust. Without trust, there can be no love. Without love, there can be no genuine Christian community. The congregation responded enthusiastically to Pastor Hayes' leadership. His sermons were biblically sound and emotionally powerful. His pastoral care was attentive and compassionate. His administrative skills helped the church grow and develop new ministries. Within a year, Mount Calvary Baptist Church had grown from 600 members to 750 members. Within 2 years, we'd built a new sanctuary to accommodate our expanding congregation. Within 3 years, Pastor Hayes was being invited to speak at conferences and revivals throughout the Southeast. He seemed like the kind of pastor who would lead our church for decades, building a legacy of faithful ministry and spiritual growth. But even in those early years, there were signs that I should have noticed, warning signals that Pastor Hayes' public persona might not reflect his private character. He was unusually interested in counseling young women, often scheduling sessions that lasted for hours and always insisting on complete privacy during those meetings. Pastoral counseling requires absolute confidentiality, he'd explain when other church leaders would ask about the length and frequency of his counseling sessions. People need to know they can share their deepest struggles without fear of judgment or gossip. He was also unusually attentive to attractive women in the congregation, remembering their names quickly, asking about their personal situations, and making sure to greet them personally after services. Pastor Hayes is so caring, the women would say. He really takes time to get to know everyone in the congregation. At the time, I interpreted Pastor Hayes' attention to women as pastoral care rather than inappropriate interest. A good pastor should know his congregation members personally and should be available to provide counseling and support. But looking back, I can see that Pastor Hayes was evaluating the women in our congregation, identifying those who might be vulnerable to his manipulation and grooming them for potential exploitation. In 2000, my son Marcus graduated from high school and left for college at Morehouse. He was a good kid, respectful, hard-working, committed to his faith and his family. I was proud of the young man he'd become and excited about his future. During his sophomore year, Marcus met Monica Williams, a psychology major at Spelman College. She was beautiful, intelligent, and seemed to share Marcus's commitment to Christian values and family life. "Dad, I think Monica might be the one," Marcus told me during one of our phone conversations. "She's everything I've been praying for in a wife." Monica came home with Marcus for Thanksgiving in 2001, and I was immediately impressed by her grace, her intelligence, and her apparent devotion to Christian living. She participated enthusiastically in family devotions, asked thoughtful questions about Scripture, and seemed genuinely interested in our church and community. "She's a wonderful young woman," my wife Sarah told me after Monica's first visit. "She's going to make Marcus very happy." When Marcus announced his engagement to Monica in 2003, the entire church family celebrated with us. Pastor Hayes performed the premarital counseling, praising Monica's spiritual maturity and her commitment to building a strong Christian marriage. "Marcus and Monica have something special," Pastor Hayes told me after one of their counseling sessions. "They're building their relationship on the right foundation, mutual respect, shared values, and commitment to God." The wedding in June 2004 was one of the most beautiful ceremonies Mount Calvary Baptist Church had ever hosted. Pastor Hayes delivered a powerful message about the sanctity of marriage, the importance of faithfulness, and the blessing of building a family according to God's design. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he preached to the 300 wedding guests. "It requires absolute commitment, complete honesty, and unwavering faithfulness. When two people join their lives in marriage, they're making a promise not just to each other, but to God Himself. Absolute commitment, complete honesty, unwavering faithfulness." Pastor Hayes was preaching about values he would violate himself while destroying the very marriage he was celebrating. But in 2004, Pastor Hayes seemed like the ideal spiritual leader, providing wise guidance to young couples and exemplifying the Christian values he preached. Marcus and Monica settled into married life with enthusiasm and joy. Marcus found work as an accountant at a firm downtown, while Monica finished her psychology degree and began working as a counselor at a community mental health center. They bought a small house 3 blocks from the church, joined the young married couples ministry, and became active in various church activities and outreach programs. "We want to serve the Lord together," Monica told me during one of our family dinners. "We want to use our talents and resources to build God's kingdom." For the first few years of their marriage, Marcus and Monica seemed like the perfect young Christian couple. They attended church faithfully, participated in Bible studies, hosted fellowship gatherings, and talked excitedly about their plans to start a family. Pastor Hayes was particularly supportive of their marriage, often praising them during sermons as an example of what Christian marriage should look like. "Look at Marcus and Monica Freeman," he'd say from the pulpit. "They're building their marriage on the right foundation. They're putting God first, supporting each other's dreams, and preparing to raise godly children." Preparing to raise godly children. Pastor Hayes was already planning to interfere with their family before they'd even conceived their first child. In 2007, when Marcus and Monica announced that they were trying to start a family, Pastor Hayes offered to provide special counseling to help them prepare for parenthood. "Raising children is one of the most important ministries God gives us," he told them. "I want to make sure you're prepared spiritually and emotionally for the responsibilities of Christian parenting." At the time, I thought Pastor Hayes' offer was an example of excellent pastoral care. He was investing in the spiritual development of young families, helping them build strong foundations for raising children in the faith. Now I understand that Pastor Hayes was positioning himself to have access to Monica during a vulnerable time in her life, when she would be dealing with the stresses and uncertainties of trying to conceive and eventually pregnancy. For 3 years, Marcus and Monica struggled with infertility. They underwent medical testing, tried various treatments, and prayed earnestly for God to bless them with children. During this difficult period, Pastor Hayes was particularly attentive to Monica's emotional and spiritual needs. "Pastor Hayes has been such a blessing during this difficult time," Monica would tell me. "He understands what we're going through, and he's helping me keep my faith strong even when I feel discouraged." Pastor Hayes scheduled regular counseling sessions with Monica, sometimes meeting with her alone when Marcus was working late or traveling for business. He called her frequently to check on her emotional state and offer encouragement. "Monica needs extra pastoral support right now," he explained when I commented on how much time he was spending with her. Infertility can be devastating for a woman's sense of identity and purpose. She needs to know that her worth isn't dependent on her ability to have children. Pastor Hayes was providing what appeared to be excellent pastoral care during a difficult time. But he was actually grooming Monica for exploitation, creating emotional dependency and positioning himself as the person who understood her better than her own husband. In 2010, Monica finally became pregnant. The entire church family rejoiced with Marcus and Monica, praising God for answering prayers and blessing them with the child they'd waited for so long. Pastor Hayes seemed particularly excited about Monica's pregnancy, frequently asking about her health, offering to provide special prenatal counseling, and making sure she had everything she needed during the difficult early months. "This baby is such a blessing," he'd say during church announcements. "Marcus and Monica have waited so faithfully for this gift from God." But what the congregation didn't know was that Pastor Hayes had a personal interest in Monica's pregnancy that went beyond pastoral care. Looking back, I can see that Monica's behavior changed during her pregnancy in ways that should have raised questions. She became more secretive about her prenatal appointments, often claiming she was going alone because Marcus was busy at work. She spent more time at the church, volunteering for various ministries and activities that kept her in close contact with Pastor Hayes throughout the week. She also became more emotional and sensitive, frequently crying during services and seeming to need extra comfort and reassurance from Pastor Hayes. "Pregnancy hormones can make women very emotional," Pastor Hayes would explain when people commented on Monica's increased sensitivity. "She needs extra pastoral support during this vulnerable time." Extra pastoral support. Pastor Hayes was using Monica's pregnancy as an excuse to spend increasing amounts of time with her, always framing their relationship as appropriate pastoral care. When Isaiah was born in March 2011, the entire congregation celebrated the arrival of our newest church baby. Marcus was overjoyed to finally be a father, and Monica seemed radiant with happiness and maternal love. Pastor Hayes performed the baby dedication ceremony when Isaiah was 6 weeks old, holding him with unusual tenderness and speaking with deep emotion about the blessing of new life. "This child represents hope," he preached during the dedication service. "He represents the faithfulness of God who answers prayer and blesses families according to his perfect timing." The faithfulness of God. Pastor Hayes was crediting God for a child that was actually the result of his own adultery and exploitation. But none of us knew the truth then. We saw a pastor who was celebrating the joy of new life and a young family that had been blessed after years of waiting and prayer. For the first few months of Isaiah's life, everything seemed normal. Marcus was a devoted father, Monica was a loving mother, and Pastor Hayes continued to provide pastoral support to their growing family. But there were subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. Pastor Hayes visited the Freeman household more frequently than he visited other church families, always claiming he wanted to check on the new baby and provide pastoral support to new parents. Monica seemed unusually dependent on Pastor Hayes' approval and guidance about parenting decisions, frequently asking his opinion about feeding schedules, sleeping arrangements, and child care issues. Pastor Hayes also seemed unusually knowledgeable about Isaiah's development and personality, often commenting on the baby's features, temperament, and growth patterns with the kind of detailed awareness that typically comes from daily contact. "Pastor Hayes is so good with babies," Monica would say when people commented on his attentiveness to Isaiah. "He has such a natural gift for understanding children's needs." A natural gift for understanding children's needs. Or a biological father's instinctive connection with his own child. But I was too trusting, too focused on the positive aspects of pastoral care, and too grateful for Pastor Hayes' leadership to question why he was so particularly invested in my son's family. As Isaiah grew from an infant into a toddler, Pastor Hayes' special attention to the Freeman family became even more pronounced. He would hold Isaiah during church services, play with him during fellowship gatherings, and frequently comment on his intelligence and personality. "That little boy is going to be something special," Pastor Hayes would say while watching Isaiah play. You can see the intelligence in his eyes. Pastor Hayes also began making references to Isaiah during his sermons, using him as an example of God's blessing and faithfulness. He would talk about the joy of watching children grow in the faith and the importance of raising the next generation to love and serve God. When I look at little Isaiah Freeman, he'd say from the pulpit, I see the future of our church. I see a child who's going to grow up to do great things for God's kingdom. The future of our church. Pastor Hayes was already claiming a special relationship with Isaiah that went beyond normal pastoral interest. But the most troubling sign was how protective Pastor Hayes became of Monica and Isaiah, always making sure they had everything they needed and frequently offering to help with child care responsibilities when Marcus was working. Monica shouldn't have to handle everything alone, he'd say when offering to babysit Isaiah during church activities. Young mothers need support from their church family. Support from their church family. Pastor Hayes was positioning himself as Isaiah's primary male role model apart from Marcus, creating a relationship that would make sense if people ever discovered the biological truth. By Isaiah's first birthday in 2012, Pastor Hayes had essentially integrated himself into the Freeman family's daily life. He was present for most major milestones, involved in important decisions about Isaiah's care and development, and clearly emotionally invested in the child's welfare in ways that went beyond pastoral duty. But none of us understood what we were witnessing. We saw a pastor who cared deeply about the families in his congregation and who was particularly supportive of young parents navigating the challenges of raising children in the faith. What we were actually witnessing was a biological father maintaining a secret relationship with his child while allowing another man to bear the financial and emotional responsibilities of parenthood. The deception continued for 6 months, until that Sunday morning in September 2012 when Pastor Hayes' emotional connection to Isaiah overcame his careful self-control during the baptism ceremony. The next morning, I called Deacon Robert Washington and asked him to meet me for coffee at the diner across town where we could talk privately without being interrupted by other church members. Robert, I need to discuss something with you in complete confidence. What's troubling you, Luther? Yesterday's baptism ceremony. Did you notice anything unusual about what Pastor Hayes said? Robert was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee and looking out the window at the morning traffic. You mean when he called baby Isaiah, my son, instead of using the traditional baptismal words? You heard it too. I heard it. And so did my wife. We talked about it on the way home from church. What did you think it meant? I thought it was strange. Pastor Hayes is usually very careful about liturgical language. He doesn't deviate from traditional formulations without good reason. So you think it was intentional? I think it was revealing, whether it was intentional or not. Robert's response confirmed that other church members had noticed Pastor Hayes' slip and were questioning what it meant. Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. What is it? Have you ever suspected that Pastor Hayes might be having inappropriate relationships with women in the congregation? Robert looked uncomfortable with the question, glancing around the diner to make sure no one was listening to our conversation. Luther, that's a serious question to ask about our pastor. I'm not making an accusation. I'm asking if you've ever had suspicions. There have been observations. Behaviors that seemed unusual for pastoral relationships. What kind of behaviors? Private counseling sessions that lasted for hours. Phone calls at unusual times. Visits to homes when husbands weren't present. Special attention to certain women that went beyond normal pastoral care. With Monica specifically? Among others. But yes, Monica has been receiving an unusual amount of pastoral attention since Isaiah was born. Since Isaiah was born. Which meant Pastor Hayes had been paying special attention to Monica throughout her pregnancy and after the birth, behavior that other church members had noticed but hadn't understood. Robert, I think Pastor Hayes and Monica have been having an affair, and I think Isaiah might be Pastor Hayes' biological son. Robert was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd just suggested. That would explain a lot of things that haven't made sense. What things? The way Pastor Hayes lights up when he sees Isaiah. The way he always volunteers to hold the baby during church services. The way Monica always brings Isaiah to church events even when Marcus can't attend. And the way Pastor Hayes said, "My son," during the baptism? If what you're suggesting is true, then Pastor Hayes revealed the truth accidentally during what should have been the most sacred moment of that baby's spiritual life. What do you think I should do? You need to confront Pastor Hayes directly. If he's been having an affair and fathering children with married women in our congregation, the entire church leadership needs to know. And if I'm wrong? Then you apologize and we all move on. But Luther, if you're right, then we have a pastor who's been violating his ordination vows, his marriage vows, and his responsibilities to this congregation. That can't be ignored. What about Marcus? What about my family? Your family is already being destroyed by this deception. The question is whether you're going to let it continue or whether you're going to expose it and give everyone a chance to deal with the truth. The truth could destroy Marcus's marriage. The lie is already destroying Marcus's marriage. He just doesn't know it yet. Robert was right, but the thought of confronting Pastor Hayes and potentially destroying my son's family was almost overwhelming. How do I even begin a conversation like that? You start with what you witnessed during the baptism and see how Pastor Hayes responds. If he's innocent, he'll be confused and defensive. If he's guilty, he'll be evasive and try to deflect. And if he confesses? Then you deal with the confession according to Scripture and church discipline procedures. Which means what, exactly? Which means Pastor Hayes resigns or is removed from ministry, confesses his sin publicly, and seeks appropriate restoration and counseling. And Monica? Monica faces the consequences of her choices. If she's been committing adultery with our pastor, then she's violated her marriage vows and her church membership commitments. This is going to destroy so many people, Robert. Luther, people are already being destroyed. They're just being destroyed by lies instead of truth. That afternoon, I made an appointment to meet with Pastor Hayes in his office at the church. I'd been in that office hundreds of times over the years, for planning meetings, counseling sessions, prayer times, and fellowship. It was a comfortable space with theological books lining the walls, family photos on the desk, and inspirational artwork depicting scenes from Scripture. But this meeting felt different. I was walking into that office to confront a man I'd trusted and respected for 3 years about the most serious violation of pastoral ethics I could imagine. Pastor Hayes, we need to discuss what happened during Isaiah's baptism yesterday. What about it? I thought it was a beautiful ceremony. You called Isaiah my son during the baptismal prayer. Pastor Hayes' face went completely white, and I saw his hands start to tremble slightly. Did I? I don't remember saying that. You said, "I baptize you, my son, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." 200 people heard you. It must have been a slip of the tongue. Sometimes during emotional moments, pastors say things differently than usual. Pastor Hayes, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you having an affair with Monica? The silence that followed lasted for almost a minute. Pastor Hayes stared at his desk, clearly struggling with whether to continue lying or to confess. Luther, Are you having an affair with my daughter-in-law? It's not an affair. Monica and I have developed deep feelings for each other. Deep feelings for each other. Pastor Hayes was framing adultery as emotional connection rather than sin and betrayal. Pastor Hayes, Monica is married to my son. You're married to Sister Hayes. What you're describing is adultery. It's more complicated than that. How is it more complicated? You're both married to other people. You're having a sexual relationship. That's adultery by any definition. Monica and Marcus's marriage was struggling. She came to me for counseling, and over time we developed a connection that grew into something deeper. She came to him for counseling. Pastor Hayes had exploited his position as spiritual counselor to seduce a vulnerable married woman. And during this counseling relationship, you began a sexual affair with her? We fell in love. You exploited your position as her pastor to seduce her while she was seeking spiritual guidance. That's not what happened. Then tell me what did happen. Pastor Hayes was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts before responding. Monica was unhappy in her marriage. She felt unappreciated, unloved, taken for granted. She needed someone who understood her spiritual needs and emotional depth. So you provided spiritual counseling by having sex with her? I provided the emotional and spiritual connection she wasn't getting at home. The emotional and spiritual connection. Pastor Hayes was describing adultery as ministry, as if seducing my daughter-in-law was a form of pastoral care. Pastor Hayes, is Isaiah your biological son? Another long silence. Pastor Hayes looked at the family photos on his desk, pictures of his wife Dorothy and their 2 children, then looked back at me. Yes. The word hit me like a physical blow. Our pastor had just confirmed that he'd fathered a child with my daughter-in-law while she was married to my son. Does Marcus know? No. And he can never know. It would destroy him and his relationship with Monica. So you're going to let my son continue believing that he's Isaiah's father while you know the truth? We think that's best for everyone involved. Best for everyone involved. Pastor Hayes thought it was appropriate to let my son unknowingly raise another man's child while the real father maintained his position as our spiritual leader. How long has this affair been going on? About 2 years. 2 years. Pastor Hayes had been seducing and exploiting my daughter-in-law for 2 years while preaching to our congregation about morality, faithfulness, and spiritual integrity. And your wife has no idea. Dorothy suspects that I've been struggling with some personal issues, but she doesn't know the specifics. The specifics being that you've been committing adultery with a member of our congregation and fathering children with her? Luther, I know this looks bad. It doesn't just look bad. It is bad. You've violated your ordination vows, your marriage vows, and your responsibilities to this congregation. I never intended for this to happen. But it did happen. And it's been happening for 2 years. This isn't a moment of weakness. It's a pattern of behavior that violates everything you're supposed to represent as our pastor. I love Monica. And I love Isaiah. They've brought meaning and joy into my life that I hadn't experienced in years. At the expense of my son, your wife, and the spiritual integrity of this congregation. Sometimes love is complicated, Luther. Sometimes it doesn't fit into neat theological categories. Love is complicated. Pastor Hayes was using love as an excuse for adultery, exploitation, and betrayal. Pastor Hayes, what you're describing isn't love. It's selfish desire that you've acted on without regard for the people you're hurting. You don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. You exploited your position as Monica's spiritual counselor to seduce her. You've been having an affair for 2 years. You fathered a child that another man is unknowingly raising. And you want to continue this deception indefinitely. We want to handle this situation in a way that minimizes harm to everyone involved. The way to minimize harm would have been to not start the affair in the first place. But since we did, we need to figure out how to move forward responsibly. Responsibly? Pastor Hayes, there's nothing responsible about letting my son raise your biological child while you maintain your affair with his wife. We're not maintaining an affair anymore. What do you mean? Monica and I have ended our physical relationship. We're trying to focus on our respective families while maintaining our spiritual connection. Their spiritual connection. Pastor Hayes and Monica had supposedly ended their physical affair but were continuing their emotional affair while calling it spiritual. When did you end the physical relationship? After Isaiah was born. We realized that continuing the affair would be too risky and too complicated. But you're still emotionally involved with each other? We care about each other deeply. That can't just be turned off. And you see each other regularly through church activities? Yes. So you've ended the sexual component of your affair but maintained the emotional component while continuing to deceive both of your spouses? We're trying to do what's right while honoring our feelings for each other. What's right while honoring their feelings? Pastor Hayes thought he could maintain an emotional affair with my daughter-in-law while calling it appropriate behavior. Pastor Hayes, I'm going to ask you directly, are you going to confess this affair to the church board and resign your position? I can't do that, Luther. It would destroy too many people and too many families. Your affair has already destroyed families. Confession and resignation would at least provide honesty about what's happened. I have a responsibility to this congregation. I can't abandon them because of my personal struggles. You have a responsibility to provide moral and spiritual leadership that you've forfeited through your behavior. I can still provide effective ministry while working through my personal issues. You can't provide effective ministry while living a lie and maintaining an inappropriate relationship with a married woman in the congregation. Pastor Hayes was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do, Luther? I'm going to pray about it. And then I'm going to do whatever God leads me to do. I hope you'll consider the impact your actions could have on innocent people. Innocent people. Like my son, who was being deceived about his wife and his child. Or like the congregation, who was being led by a pastor who violated his most basic vows. I'll consider the impact, Pastor Hayes. But I'll also consider the impact of allowing this deception to continue indefinitely. I left Pastor Hayes' office knowing that he had no intention of confessing his affair or resigning his position. He wanted to continue his emotional relationship with Monica while maintaining his pastoral authority and letting my son unknowingly raise his biological child. That evening, I met with my wife, Sarah, to discuss what I'd learned and what I thought we should do about it. Sarah and I had been married for 35 years, and she'd been my partner in ministry throughout my service as a deacon. She understood church politics, pastoral leadership, and the complexities of handling sin and discipline within a congregation. Sarah, I need to tell you something that's going to be difficult to hear. What is it, Luther? I told her everything. Pastor Hayes' slip during the baptism, my conversation with Monica, my meeting with Pastor Hayes, and the confirmation that our pastor had been having an affair with our daughter-in-law and had fathered Isaiah. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more horrified with each detail I revealed. Luther, this is unbelievable. Pastor Hayes has been preaching to us about faithfulness and morality while living this lie. For 2 years. And Marcus has no idea that Isaiah isn't his biological son? None. What are you going to do? I don't know. If I expose the affair, it destroys Marcus's marriage and our family. If I don't expose it, it allows Pastor Hayes to continue deceiving our congregation. But you can't let this continue indefinitely. I know. But I also can't destroy my son's life just to expose Pastor Hayes' hypocrisy. Luther, your son deserves to know the truth about his wife and his child. And our congregation deserves to know the truth about their pastor. But the truth will devastate everyone involved. The lie is already devastating everyone involved. They just don't know it yet. Sarah was right. The deception was already causing harm. It was just hidden from the people being hurt most directly. What do you think I should do? I think you should tell Marcus the truth and let him decide how to handle his marriage. And I think you should report Pastor Hayes to the church board and let them decide how to handle his ministry. Even if it destroys our family and our church? Luther, our family and our church are already being destroyed by lies and betrayal. Truth might be painful, but it's the only foundation for healing and restoration. And if Marcus can't forgive Monica? If the church splits over this scandal? Then that's the consequence of Pastor Hayes and Monica's choices, not the consequence of your honesty. Sarah was right, but I still struggled with the magnitude of what exposing the truth would mean for everyone involved. How do I tell my son that his wife has been unfaithful and his child isn't biologically his? very carefully, with love, with support, and with the understanding that the truth, however painful, is better than living a lie. And how do I tell our congregation that their spiritual leader has been exploiting his authority to seduce married women? The same way, with love, with support, and with the understanding that the church's integrity is more important than protecting one man's reputation. Over the next few days, I prayed about the situation and sought guidance from Scripture about how to handle adultery, deception, and spiritual leadership failures. I read Matthew 18 about confronting sin within the church community. I studied 1 Timothy 5 about handling accusations against elders. I examined 1 Corinthians 5 about removing unrepentant sinners from fellowship. Every passage I read pointed toward the same conclusion: truth must be revealed, sin must be confessed, and spiritual leaders must be held accountable for their behavior. But I also read passages about forgiveness, restoration, and the importance of handling discipline with love and wisdom rather than anger and vindictiveness. I decided to give Pastor Hayes one more opportunity to handle the situation honestly before taking action myself. I called his office and scheduled another meeting. Pastor Hayes, I've been praying about our conversation, and I want to give you an opportunity to handle this situation appropriately. What do you mean? I mean I want you to confess your affair to your wife, to my son, and to the church board. I want you to resign your position and seek appropriate counseling and restoration. Luther, I can't do that. Then I'm going to do it for you. You're going to destroy innocent people over something that's already ended. I'm going to tell the truth about something that should never have started. And what about Monica? What about Isaiah? What about your son's marriage? Monica made her choices when she started the affair. Isaiah deserves to know who his real father is. And my son deserves to know the truth about his wife. You're going to ruin multiple families over this. The families were already ruined by the affair. I'm just going to stop pretending otherwise. Pastor Hayes was quiet for a moment. How long do I have? To do what? To confess and resign before you take action. 1 week. If you haven't confessed to your wife, my son, and the church board by next Sunday, I'll do it myself. And if I do confess, will you keep this private? If you confess honestly and completely, and if you resign your position, I'll support your efforts at restoration rather than pursuing discipline. But the information will still become public? Pastor Hayes, you can't confess adultery and resign from pastoral ministry without people understanding why. But you can control how the information is revealed and what steps you take toward restoration. I need time to figure out how to handle this. You have 1 week. I left Pastor Hayes' office knowing that he would spend the next week trying to figure out how to minimize the consequences of his affair rather than how to handle it honestly. But I'd given him the opportunity to do the right thing. If he chose not to take it, then I'd handle the situation myself. That weekend, I spoke with Deacon Washington about the timeline I'd given Pastor Hayes and the plan I'd developed for exposing the affair if he didn't confess voluntarily. Robert, if Pastor Hayes doesn't confess by next Sunday, I'm going to address the church board on Monday morning. What will you tell them? Everything. The affair, the paternity issue, the deception, the abuse of pastoral authority. And if they don't believe you? I have Pastor Hayes' confession from our private conversation. I have Monica's partial admission. And I have the testimony of multiple church members who heard Pastor Hayes call Isaiah, my son, during the baptism. What about Marcus? When will you tell him? After I speak with the church board. I want to make sure the church leadership understands the situation before it becomes a public scandal. And Monica? Monica will have to face the consequences of her choices. If she's been committing adultery with our pastor, then she's violated her marriage vows and her church membership commitments. This is going to be devastating for everyone involved. Yes, it is. But continuing the deception would be more devastating in the long run. Sunday morning arrived, and Pastor Hayes preached his regular sermon about forgiveness and redemption. The irony was overwhelming. Here was a man preaching about spiritual restoration while refusing to confess his own sins and seek appropriate restoration. His sermon text was from 1 John 1 verse 9. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Confession is the pathway to restoration, Pastor Hayes preached to our congregation. When we acknowledge our failures and seek God's forgiveness, we open the door to healing and renewal. The pathway to restoration. Pastor Hayes was preaching about confession while refusing to confess his own adultery and exploitation. But confession requires courage, he continued. It requires the willingness to face the truth about ourselves and to accept responsibility for the pain we've caused others. The willingness to face the truth about ourselves. Pastor Hayes was describing exactly what he was unwilling to do. After the service, I waited to see if Pastor Hayes would approach me with news that he'd confessed to his wife or made arrangements to address the church board. He didn't. Instead, he shook hands with church members, made small talk about the beautiful weather, and acted like everything was normal. Monica was there with Marcus and Isaiah, sitting in their usual pew in the third row, participating in worship like the perfect young family. Watching them together, my son holding the baby he thought was his, Monica singing hymns about faithfulness while having deceived her husband for 2 years, Pastor Hayes preaching about redemption while refusing to seek it, I knew I couldn't allow the deception to continue any longer. Monday morning, I called an emergency meeting with the church board. Mount Calvary Baptist Church was governed by a board of 7 deacons, all men who'd been elected by the congregation to provide spiritual leadership and oversight of church operations. Brothers, I need to discuss a serious matter concerning Pastor Hayes' conduct and fitness for ministry. What kind of matter? Asked Chairman Deacon Williams. Pastor Hayes has been having an affair with a married woman in our congregation for approximately 2 years. He has fathered a child with this woman, and he has been allowing her husband to unknowingly raise the child as his own. The silence that followed was absolute. 7 deacons stared at me like I'd announced that the church was on fire. Luther, that's an extremely serious accusation, said Deacon Williams. Do you have evidence to support these claims? I told them about Pastor Hayes' slip during the baptism, about my conversations with Monica and Pastor Hayes, and about the pastor's confession during our private meeting. Pastor Hayes admitted to you that he's been having an affair? Asked Deacon Johnson. He admitted that he and Monica had developed deep feelings for each other and that Isaiah is his biological son. And the affair is ongoing? Pastor Hayes claims they ended the physical relationship after Isaiah was born, but they're still emotionally involved. Who is the woman? Asked Deacon Robinson. Monica Freeman. My daughter-in-law. The room erupted in shocked murmurs and exclamations. The deacons had known Monica since she'd joined the church after marrying my son. They'd watched her participate in church activities, serve in ministries, and apparently live a faithful Christian life. Luther, are you certain about this information? Asked Deacon Williams. I'm certain. Pastor Hayes confessed his relationship with Monica and acknowledged that Isaiah is his biological son. And your son has no knowledge of this situation? None. Marcus believes that Isaiah is his biological child and that Monica has been faithful to their marriage. This is devastating, said Deacon Johnson. If this information is accurate, Pastor Hayes has violated his ordination vows, his marriage vows, and his responsibilities to this congregation. It's accurate. And it gets worse. How does it get worse? Pastor Hayes has refused to confess the affair or resign his position. He wants to continue his ministry while maintaining his emotional relationship with Monica and allowing my son to unknowingly raise his biological child. He wants to continue as our pastor after confessing adultery to you? He believes he can provide effective ministry while working through his personal issues. That's impossible, said Deacon Robinson. A pastor who's living in unconfessed sin and deception cannot provide spiritual leadership to this congregation. I agree. That's why I'm bringing this matter to the board. Deacon Williams called for a brief recess so the board members could process what they'd learned and discuss how to proceed. When we reconvened, Chairman Williams spoke for the group. Luther, The board appreciates you bringing this matter to our attention. We're going to request an immediate meeting with Pastor Hayes to discuss these allegations. When? This afternoon. We'll ask Pastor Hayes to respond to your account of his behavior and his confession. And if he admits to the affair, then we'll ask for his immediate resignation and begin the process of finding interim pastoral leadership. What if he denies everything? Then we'll have to investigate further and determine whose account is more credible. And what about Monica and my son? That's a family matter that you'll have to handle separately from the church discipline process. But the congregation will need to know why Pastor Hayes is resigning, if he resigns. We'll address that question after we meet with Pastor Hayes and determine the facts of the situation. That afternoon, the church board met with Pastor Hayes in the conference room adjacent to his office. I wasn't present for the meeting, but Deacon Williams called me that evening to report what had happened. Luther, Pastor Hayes initially denied having an affair with Monica. Initially. When we confronted him with your account of his confession, he admitted that he'd had an inappropriate emotional relationship with Monica but denied that it was sexual. What about Isaiah's paternity? He admitted that Isaiah might be his biological son but claimed he wasn't certain. He told me directly that Isaiah was his son. When we pressed him on that point, he acknowledged that he'd told you Isaiah was his biological child. So he confessed to the affair and the paternity? Eventually. But he continued to minimize the severity of his behavior and refused to accept responsibility for the harm he's caused. Did he agree to resign? No. He asked for time to work through this situation and claimed that resigning would abandon the congregation during a difficult time. So he still wants to continue as pastor after confessing adultery? He wants to continue ministry while receiving counseling for his personal struggles. What did the board decide? We voted unanimously to request his immediate resignation. If he refuses, we'll terminate his employment and recommend that the congregation call a new pastor. And if he agrees to resign, we'll accept his resignation and begin searching for interim pastoral leadership immediately. What about the congregation? When will they know what's happened? We're going to give Pastor Hayes 48 hours to resign voluntarily. If he doesn't, we'll announce his termination and the reasons for it during Sunday's service. And Monica? Will the congregation know about her involvement? That depends on how Pastor Hayes handles his resignation. If he confesses his sin publicly and takes full responsibility, we might be able to avoid naming specific individuals. If he tries to minimize his behavior or deny responsibility, we may have to be more specific about the circumstances. Tuesday evening, Pastor Hayes called and asked to meet with me privately. Luther, I've been thinking about our conversation and the board's request for my resignation. And I'm willing to resign my position if you'll agree to keep the details of my relationship with Monica private. Pastor Hayes, you can't resign from pastoral ministry without people understanding why. I can say that I'm resigning due to personal issues that require my full attention. People aren't stupid. If you resign suddenly after 3 years of effective ministry, they're going to ask questions. I'm hoping you'll help me manage those questions in a way that protects Monica and your family. My priority is protecting my son and my grandson, not protecting you and Monica from the consequences of your affair. What if I resign and leave town? Would that satisfy your concerns about my continued ministry? Leaving town doesn't address the fact that my son is unknowingly raising your biological child. Luther, if you tell Marcus the truth about Isaiah's paternity, it will destroy his marriage and his relationship with his son. If I don't tell Marcus the truth, it allows you and Monica to continue deceiving him indefinitely. Sometimes protecting people requires allowing them to live with comfortable illusions rather than devastating truths. Comfortable illusions. Pastor Hayes wanted me to participate in deceiving my son so that he and Monica could avoid facing the full consequences of their affair. Pastor Hayes, my son deserves to know the truth about his wife and his child. Even if that truth destroys his family is already destroyed by your affair and Monica's betrayal. The truth will just make the destruction visible. And you think that's better? I think that's honest. And honesty is the only foundation for genuine restoration and healing. Pastor Hayes was quiet for a moment. If I resign and confess publicly, will you support my efforts to seek restoration and forgiveness? If you confess honestly and completely, and if you take full responsibility for your behavior, I'll support appropriate restoration processes. But you'll still tell Marcus about Isaiah's paternity? Yes. Even though it will devastate him? Because he deserves to know the truth. Pastor Hayes resigned the next morning, effective immediately. His resignation letter to the congregation was brief and vague. Due to personal issues that require my full attention, I am resigning my position as pastor of Mount Calvary Baptist Church. I ask for your prayers and understanding during this difficult time. But the church board's announcement was more specific. Pastor Hayes has resigned following the revelation of conduct incompatible with pastoral ministry. The board is beginning the search for interim pastoral leadership immediately. The congregation was shocked and confused. Pastor Hayes had been an effective preacher and administrator with no obvious problems or conflicts. His sudden resignation following allegations of misconduct was completely unexpected. Within days, rumors were circulating about what kind of misconduct had led to Pastor Hayes' resignation. Some people speculated about financial impropriety. Others wondered about doctrinal issues. A few suspected personal scandals involving women or drinking. But no one suspected the truth, that Pastor Hayes had been having an affair with a young mother in the congregation and had fathered a child with her. Thursday evening, I sat down with my son Marcus to tell him the truth about his wife, his pastor, and his son. Marcus, I need to discuss something with you that's going to be very difficult to hear. What's wrong, Dad? You've seemed really troubled lately. It's about Pastor Hayes' resignation. And it's about Monica. What about them? Pastor Hayes resigned because he's been having an affair with a married woman in our congregation for the past 2 years. Marcus looked confused. An affair? With who? With Monica. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. That's impossible. Monica would never. Pastor Hayes would never. Marcus, I know this is hard to believe, but I have confirmation from both Pastor Hayes and Monica that they've been having an affair. When? How? Monica's with me, or Isaiah, almost all the time. During counseling sessions that lasted for hours. During church activities when you were working. During visits that were supposedly about spiritual guidance. But she never mentioned having problems that required counseling. She told Pastor Hayes that she was unhappy in your marriage, that she felt unappreciated and taken for granted. So she had an affair instead of talking to me about her feelings? She sought counseling from Pastor Hayes, and he exploited his position to seduce her. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd told him. Dad, are you absolutely certain about this? I'm certain. Pastor Hayes confessed the affair to me directly. And Monica? Monica confirmed the relationship when I confronted her after the baptism. After the baptism? What happened during the baptism? Pastor Hayes called Isaiah, my son, during the baptismal prayer. Marcus stared at me with growing horror. What are you saying? I'm saying that Pastor Hayes is Isaiah's biological father. The silence that followed lasted for several minutes. Marcus sat in his chair, staring at the floor, trying to process the information that his wife had been unfaithful, his pastor had betrayed his trust, and his son wasn't biologically his. How long have you known? He asked finally. Since the baptism last Sunday. I've spent this week investigating and confirming what I suspected. And you're certain that Isaiah isn't my son? Pastor Hayes confirmed that Isaiah is his biological child. Does Monica know that you know? Yes. I confronted her after the baptism, and she admitted to the affair. What did she say? She begged me not to tell you. She said it would destroy our family. Our family was already destroyed the moment she started sleeping with another man. Marcus was right, but I could see that he was struggling to accept the magnitude of Monica's betrayal. Marcus, I'm sorry you had to learn this information. But I felt like you deserved to know the truth. You were right to tell me. I can't live my life based on lies. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. I need to talk to Monica and figure out what this means for our marriage and for Isaiah. And Pastor Hayes? Pastor Hayes can go to hell. That evening, Marcus confronted Monica about the affair and Isaiah's paternity. I wasn't present for their conversation, but Marcus called me the next morning to report what had happened. Dad, Monica confessed everything. The affair, the deception, Isaiah's paternity, all of it. How are you handling it? I'm devastated. I feel like my entire life for the past 2 years has been a lie. What did Monica say about why she had the affair? She said she was unhappy in our marriage and that Pastor Hayes made her feel special and understood. And about Isaiah? She said she knew from the beginning that Isaiah might not be my biological son, but she hoped I'd never find out. So she was willing to let you raise another man's child indefinitely? Yes. She said she thought it was better for everyone if I never knew the truth. What are you going to do about your marriage? I don't know. Monica wants to go to counseling and try to work things out. She says the affair is over and that she wants to focus on our family. And what do you want? I want to understand how the woman I've been married to for 8 years could deceive me so completely about something so fundamental. Have you talked to a lawyer? Not yet. But I'm thinking about it. And Isaiah? That's the hardest part, Dad. I love that little boy. He's been my son for 18 months. I don't know how to process the fact that he's not biologically mine. Biology doesn't determine love, Marcus. You can still be Isaiah's father in every way that matters. But every time I look at him, I'll know that Monica conceived him with another man while she was married to me. That's Monica's sin, not Isaiah's. I know. But it doesn't make it easier. Over the next few weeks, our family and our church struggled to process the scandal of Pastor Hayes' affair and resignation. The congregation was divided between those who were shocked and disappointed by Pastor Hayes' behavior, and those who thought the church board had overreacted to what might have been a minor indiscretion. Some church members suspected that more was involved than the board had revealed publicly, but most people didn't know the specific details of the affair or the paternity issue. Monica stopped attending church services, unable to face the questions and speculation about her relationship with Pastor Hayes. Marcus continued attending but struggled with the stares and whispered conversations of people who were beginning to understand his connection to the scandal. Isaiah became the center of attention wherever he went, with church members studying his features and wondering about his parentage. A month after Pastor Hayes' resignation, the truth about the affair and Isaiah's paternity became public knowledge when someone leaked information from the church board meetings to the local newspaper. The headline read, "Former Baptist pastor admits affair with congregation member, father's child." The article detailed Pastor Hayes' affair with Monica, Isaiah's paternity, and the deception that had been maintained for months after the baby's birth. The story spread quickly through our community, generating gossip, speculation, and judgment about everyone involved. Pastor Hayes and his wife Dorothy left town within days of the article's publication. I later learned that they'd moved to Tennessee, where Pastor Hayes took work as a construction supervisor while seeking restoration and counseling. Monica filed for divorce from Marcus 2 weeks after the newspaper article was published, claiming that the public exposure of her affair made it impossible to restore their marriage. Marcus was granted full custody of Isaiah, whom he chose to continue raising as his son despite the biological reality. "I don't care about DNA," he told me during one of our conversations about the custody arrangement. "Isaiah is my son in every way that matters. I've been his father since birth, and I'm going to continue being his father." The congregation split over how to handle the scandal. About 150 members left to find churches with more stable leadership. Others rallied around the remaining leadership and focused on healing and restoration. I remained as a deacon but stepped back from many of my responsibilities to focus on helping my son and grandson navigate the aftermath of Monica's betrayal. 3 years after the scandal, Mount Calvary Baptist Church had recovered much of its stability under new pastoral leadership, but the memory of Pastor Hayes' affair continued to affect how the congregation viewed pastoral authority and spiritual leadership. We'd implemented new policies requiring accountability partners for pastoral counseling, mandatory reporting of extended private meetings with opposite-sex church members, and regular reviews of pastoral conduct by the deacon board. Marcus had rebuilt his life as a single father, choosing to focus on raising Isaiah rather than pursuing another romantic relationship. "I learned something valuable from this experience," he told me during one of our conversations about the scandal. "What did you learn?" "I learned that people are capable of deceiving you about the most fundamental aspects of their character, even when you think you know them completely. That's a hard lesson. But I also learned that you can choose to love someone regardless of biology, and that being a father is about commitment and care rather than DNA. You're a good father to Isaiah." "I'm trying to be. And I'm trying to teach him that honesty and integrity are more important than anything else." "What will you tell him about his biological father when he's old enough to understand?" "I'll tell him the truth. That his biological father was someone who made bad choices and hurt a lot of people. But that his real father is the man who chose to love him and raise him regardless of biology." "And about Monica?" "I'll tell him that his mother made mistakes but that she loved him, even if she didn't always make good decisions about how to show that love." "Do you think you'll ever forgive Monica?" "I'm working on it. Not for her sake, but for mine and Isaiah's. Holding on to anger and resentment isn't healthy for any of us." "And Pastor Hayes?" "Pastor Hayes betrayed his calling, his congregation, and his family. He exploited his position to seduce a vulnerable woman, and then tried to cover up his sin rather than confess and seek restoration. I don't think I'll ever forgive him." 4 years after the scandal, I reflected on what I'd learned about spiritual leadership, family loyalty, and the importance of truth in relationships. Pastor Hayes had seemed like an effective spiritual leader. He preached compelling sermons, provided thoughtful counseling, and appeared to live according to the values he taught. But his public ministry had been built on private deception, and his spiritual authority had been corrupted by his abuse of pastoral power. Monica had seemed like a devoted wife and mother. She participated actively in church life, cared for her family, and appeared to embrace Christian values. But her public faithfulness had been a facade that concealed a pattern of betrayal and deception that violated her most fundamental commitments. The scandal taught our congregation that spiritual authority must be accompanied by genuine spiritual integrity, and that appearances can be deceiving even among people we trust most deeply. But it also taught us that truth, however painful, is essential for genuine spiritual healing and restoration. My decision to expose Pastor Hayes' affair had devastating consequences for everyone involved, but it also ended a pattern of deception that was destroying my family and corrupting our church's spiritual leadership. I lost a pastor I'd respected, a daughter-in-law I'd loved, and my son's marriage that I'd hoped would last a lifetime. But I gained something more valuable: the knowledge that my family was living in truth rather than lies, and that our church's leadership was based on genuine integrity rather than hidden corruption. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell a truth that destroys comfortable illusions but creates the possibility for genuine restoration and healing. 5 years after Pastor Hayes' resignation, I received a letter from him. "Deacon Freeman," it read, "I want you to know that I've spent the past 5 years in counseling and restoration, working to understand the harm I caused and to rebuild my relationship with God and my family. I realize that my actions hurt you, your son, and our entire church family in ways that can never be fully repaired. I take full responsibility for my sin and the deception that followed. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm genuinely sorry for the pain I caused." The letter was different from what I'd expected. Pastor Hayes wasn't making excuses or minimizing his behavior. He was accepting full responsibility and expressing genuine remorse. I showed the letter to Marcus, and his response surprised me. "He sounds like he's actually learned something," Marcus said after reading Pastor Hayes' apology. "Does that change how you feel about him?" "It doesn't change what he did. But it suggests that maybe he's finally understood the impact of his actions." "Are you planning to respond?" "I might. Not to say I forgive him, but to acknowledge that he's finally taking responsibility." The letter didn't heal all the wounds Pastor Hayes had caused, but it did suggest that genuine repentance and restoration were possible even after the most serious spiritual failures. 6 years after the scandal, Isaiah was a bright, happy 7-year-old who knew Marcus as his father and understood that his biological father was someone who'd made bad choices. "Daddy Marcus chose to love me," Isaiah would tell people when they asked about his family. "That makes him my real daddy." Marcus had done an excellent job helping Isaiah understand that family is about love and commitment rather than biology. Monica had remarried and moved to another state. She maintained limited contact with Isaiah through birthday cards and Christmas gifts, but she'd essentially removed herself from his daily life. "It's probably better this way," Marcus told me. "Isaiah needs stability and consistency, not confusion about who his parents are." Our church had healed from the scandal and grown stronger in many ways. We'd learned to value truth over appearances, integrity over charisma, and accountability over blind trust in leadership. The new pastor, Reverend James Mitchell, was a man of genuine character who'd helped us rebuild our understanding of pastoral authority and spiritual leadership. "What happened with Pastor Hayes taught us all something important," Reverend Mitchell had preached during his first sermon. "It taught us that spiritual authority must be earned through consistent character, not just impressive preaching. It taught us that the congregation has a responsibility to hold their leaders accountable. And it taught us that truth, however painful, is always better than comfortable lies." 7 years after discovering Pastor Hayes' affair, I was serving as chairman of the deacon board and helping to mentor young leaders in our congregation. One of the lessons I emphasized with new deacons was the importance of recognizing warning signs of pastoral misconduct and having the courage to address them before they became devastating scandals. "If you see a pastor developing inappropriate relationships with women in the congregation, you have a responsibility to address it," I'd tell them. "If you see patterns of secretive behavior, excessive private counseling, or boundary violations, you can't just hope it will resolve itself." "But what if we're wrong?" one young deacon asked during a training session. "Then you apologize and everyone moves on," I replied. "But if you're right and you do nothing, the consequences can destroy families and devastate entire congregations." The experience with Pastor Hayes had taught me that sometimes the most loving thing church leaders can do is ask difficult questions and demand honest answers, even when that process is uncomfortable and potentially divisive. 8 years after the baptism that revealed Pastor Hayes' secret, I was reflecting on how God had used even that devastating situation to strengthen our church family and teach us important lessons about truth, accountability, and restoration. Isaiah was thriving as a bright, confident 8-year-old who understood that he was loved unconditionally by his father Marcus. Marcus had grown into a mature, thoughtful man who'd learned to forgive without forgetting and to love without naivety. Our church had developed into a community that valued authentic relationships over impressive appearances, and that understood the importance of accountability in leadership. The scandal that had seemed like it would destroy everything had actually created opportunities for genuine growth, healing, and spiritual maturity that wouldn't have been possible without the painful process of confronting hard truths. My name is Luther Freeman. I'm 70 years old, and 8 years ago our pastor accidentally revealed during my grandson's baptism that he'd been having an affair with my daughter-in-law and had fathered the child my son was unknowingly raising. Pastor William Hayes spent 2 years exploiting his position as spiritual counselor to seduce Monica while she was seeking guidance for her marriage problems. He convinced her that their relationship was spiritual and emotional rather than adultery and exploitation. Monica spent 2 years lying to my son about her faithfulness while participating in church activities and presenting herself as a devoted Christian wife and mother. My son Marcus spent 18 months unknowingly raising another man's child while being deceived by both his wife and his spiritual leader. When I discovered the truth, I had to choose between protecting my family from painful knowledge and protecting them from ongoing deception. I chose truth over comfort, exposure over protection, and justice over family harmony. The consequences were devastating for everyone involved, but they were also liberating. My son learned to love Isaiah as his chosen son rather than his biological child. Our church learned to value genuine spiritual integrity over impressive public ministry. And I learned that sometimes love requires causing pain in order to end deeper suffering. Pastor Hayes lost his ministry, his reputation, and his community standing because he chose deception over confession and self-interest over spiritual responsibility. Monica lost her marriage, her church family, and her relationship with her son because she chose adultery over faithfulness and lies over honesty. But Isaiah gained a father who chose to love him unconditionally, and our church gained leadership based on truth rather than deception. Sometimes God uses even the most painful revelations to create opportunities for genuine healing and restoration. Sometimes the truth that seems to destroy everything actually creates the foundation for something better. And sometimes a pastor's slip of the tongue during a baptism ceremony reveals years of hidden sin that must be exposed before true spiritual healing can begin. Look at your screen right now. You'll see 2 more stories waiting for you. Both from men like me who discovered the truth too late, but not too late to fight back. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And hit that notification bell if you want to join our brotherhood of men who refuse to be played for fools. Until next time, remember, the truth always comes out, and when it does, be ready.